This is
The Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time
is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
This is the podcast you were looking for.
This is not the podcast you were looking for.
Let's keep that. That's better. Turn away now. So, we were talking about this a little last time, and so it really stuck out because I reread the prologue like a bunch of times this week to just kind of get ideas about what we were going to talk about. And of course, like I was saying, we were talking about the very first sentence the last time because of its mention of the word memory. And the quote is, "The palace still shook occasionally as the earth rumbled in memory, groaned as if it would deny what had happened." And underneath I wrote memories that become legend. But then like 2 pages of notes later, I noticed a mirror quote at the end, which is interesting for a lot of different reasons that I'm sure we'll get into. But the quote, it goes, "The land around him was flat and empty. A river flowed nearby, straight and broad. But he could sense that there were no people within 100 leagues. He was alone as a man could be while still alive. Yet he could not escape memory."
And I love that because, you know, if we're talking about Wheel of Time spoilers, we're going into the last book right away, A Memory of Light. Immediately, the first sentence, the end of that prologue, and then, of course, the end of the whole series. Like that idea that Rand is this memory, that Lewis Theron is this memory that travels through time, just happens over and over and over again. And I love that we, it sort of starts right in the beginning. It's mirrored at the end of the chapter, and then it's mirrored again at the end of the series. I love that, and what is sort of the light, that always. If we've got this memory, what memory of light? What is that?
Yeah, the idea of memories, like in memories of the past and of the future, almost. And these 2 quotes at the beginning of the end of the prologue, which kind of it was what the entire book is about. The prologue is. It was really fun to read the prologue so many times after having read the series so many times, because there's just so much there already. These, like, the 2 most important characters in the whole series are standing right there, interacting, and then, the quote at the beginning and the end of the prologue, and how the prologue is sort of the beginning and end of the series, and, oh, Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, which gets into the beginning and the end, right? I mean, let's talk about the wheel a little bit. This is the Wheel of Time. We've got the wheel, let's
throw something out there.
Yeah, go for it.
Really quick, because you mentioned the beginning and the end. In the notes I started taking, I note what symbol is in the chapter heading, because it always reflects what's in the rest of the chapter. And the prologue is the snake and the wheel. Right. Yeah.
It's all about just like, this happens over and over and over again. I really love that symbolism, right? Like, and the legends that become myth. I mean, we'll talk about the intro in the next chapter, but I think the intro says an awful lot about the story and what it is that Robert Jordan is trying to do with the series.
That's really nicely laid out.
I do like in that first sentence, it talks about how the earth rumbled in memory, because we get such a link between Rand and the land.
Another thing I noticed in this last read through is that when LTT destroys himself and the earth is, all this bedrock is vaporized, and it's this crazy like jet of lava, but with the all this lava shoots out of the earth and this wind from the 4 corners. He mentions, "From north and south, from east and west, the wind howled in, snapping trees like twigs, shrieking and blowing as if to aid the growing of the mountain ever skyward, ever skyward."
Yeah, and I always thought that was sort of not only a good metaphor for like the winds coming together, but also, I mean, how does that mountain get so tall, right? It's got this incredible jet of lava, and he's created this vortex of winds that are actually pushing the lava upwards into a spire.
And we can also kind of presume that because LTT is linked to, or the dragon is linked to the land, that there's maybe an extra magical forces working there.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, certainly he affects
He's
the land and
destroying himself.
Right. Yeah, he's wounding himself. He's wounding the land.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's a gigantic light that connects him to the sky. He's
and the Fisher King thing.
Right. Sure. The wound in the side, in a way.
Yeah, he's not injured in any way. Well, except like his mind, but
right.
Not physically injured.
Right. So we sort of skip to the end of the prologue. There's a lot that happens in between the beginning and the end, but they were sort of linked together with that memory.
Yeah. I wonder how much that could do with the breaking, and not just 100 or thousands of insane male Aes Sedai tearing the world apart, but just the dragon destroying himself.
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that the breaking is linked. The destruction of the land, the destruction of the dragon are linked. And they both occur as a result of the sealing. That backlash taints Rand. It destroys, it taints the dragon, and it causes the breaking. I think those two are definitely linked together. There's no doubt, time and time again, the land is so much linked to Rand and his mood and to LTT, Lewis Theron. I mean, it's incredible how much those two are tied together. And in a lot of ways, I think, and I'll definitely want to talk about this later, but how the seasons and how they change with the Bowl of the Winds and how that's tied to how Rand's doing in his battle against the Dark One, and how turning to ice versus turning, he's got this hot heat in the beginning and this passion, and then when it breaks and we end up at Winter's Heart, he's this cold, hard, it's incredibly closely linked to see him. And that's the Fisher King, definitely.
Did a little reading on that. Not too much. I like the mythology stuff, but it's always kind of loosely tied in, like not like it doesn't tell you too much. It just gives you a little bit of insight, A
lot of our legends are based on a turning of the wheel that happened where and the legends passed down from that turning of the wheel are basically Rand, Mat, and Perrin, and the adventures become our legends. And so in a way, Robert Jordan here is saying, hey, this happens every time, and this is sort of the source of our legends and the source of our prophecies.
I like that a lot. Because I was reading about the Fisher King theories, which are like there's really clear ties there in a lot of different ways. But one thing I never had really looked into was the dragon title and what is even other than the tattoos. I didn't find too much information on it, but the little bit that I did find was that in Chinese tradition, dragons their scales are made alternatively and out of yin and then one out of yang.
Oh, okay.
And it's supposed to represent a force of destruction and preservation at the same time.
Sure.
And so as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, well, right.
Well, and I think
dragon.
I think of that force of preservation as being the one power.
Kind of destroying the world and saving the world. Right. Or destroying the world to save the world, I guess.
So we've hit this on some pretty deep levels already. I sort of want to go back to the basics. I want to sort of talk about the actual events that are taking place in the prologue. Because for someone who may be coming back to the series for the first time, you read through it once, you kind of remember the scene, but you're not really sure, wait, who are these people again? And what's going on and what kind of powers are being used? I sort of really want to go into just not just the metaphorical level, but also the sort of what's physically happening here, as we enter with these two people in this broken palace, there's a lot happening between them that we don't understand yet, and that we will.
Really shortly after him and the 100 tried to seal the boar.
So I want to get how did that happen? How is he wandering around this broken palace, absolutely mad?
Get to see too much of it, really, ever, compared to lots of other storylines. But we know some pretty key things. I think one is that throughout most of the series, at least during my first read, it really seems like a sort of paradise where not just the one power is a driving force in creating opportunities for people doing things like growing food and eliminating hunger and disease and pollution. But there's also, I guess, a different sort of culture where people seem really concerned with serving mankind rather than themselves.
There's this just total paradise. They've got flying planes, basically. They've got a police force. I mean, there is a darker side. That people certainly still commit crimes. They have binding chairs where they can put someone in there who's committed a crime. So basically, they have the oath rods. So if you're a channeler and you commit a crime, you are forced to use the power to bind yourself, and that basically forces you to obey whatever promise you swear while channeling into it, and forces you to die at a young age, right? So it's a pretty hefty punishment. And then they have these binding chairs where they can bind someone who doesn't channel, and force them to relive their worst memories or
possibly recall a crime to a committee.
And the people who can channel are called the Aes Sedai. They're led by the Tamerlane. They're served by a people called the Aiel, who are pacifist folk. They don't fight. They're well known for being the best servants, and it's an offense to bump into one even and cause him pain. So paradise, but there certainly is a bit of a darker side to it, I think. It's not perfect for everybody, right? Like it's almost too squeaky clean.
In one of Luz Theron's memories we see later in the book, I don't have this on hand, but he mentions that there may have been, or kind of alludes to the fact that there may have been some class tension also during the Age of Legends.
Sure.
Yeah, I can't remember all of it, but I definitely remember getting the sense that he's kind of saying that that they're like the world may have broken apart anyway at some point.
Well, I think you all have a very large population of channelers and then a larger population of non-channelers. And you're always going to have someone who can channel as being privileged. They have servants. They're well regarded, but it's not that hard to abuse power.
Right. I mean, they can also fly and travel at will to anywhere. Right. Definitely privileged.
Definitely privileged, right? So the population was much higher. Essentially, imagine a modern day society with less crime and more magic. So,
right. And it looks like some kind of one world government.
Sure, at least on this continent.
Right.
Yeah, it's. I don't think they go really beyond the continent. Although we don't know what the continent looks like at this point, right?
That's true.
Because this is pre-breaking, and apparently everything changes. And so, as part of this, wonderful society, you have research. You have people looking for new sources of power. Right. The one power is a wonderful source of power, but it is split. Right.
Yeah, and it's only available to people who are privileged with the correct genetics.
Right.
So, I forget, 2 or 3% of the population gets this special gift.
Right, and it's even a smaller percentage that is going to channel whether they want to or not.
Right.
Yeah, and then everyone else can be trained. But that means when you don't really have people seeking you out and training you, you end up with a much smaller population of channelers because the potential channelers don't.
A group of gifted academics and researchers somehow find out about this or this other source of power that's behind this thin veil.
They find this spot where there's a bit of a thinness, and they create a floating globe, and it's led by our favorite gal.
Essentially in charge of the Death Star.
Right, yeah.
No, I don't know if that's true.
No, that actually
it was supposed to be, but
that makes it's a big floating globe. It looks an awful lot like a Death Star. I wouldn't knock it, certainly. And of course, that's Lanfear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, she's just a researcher, and she punctures through. And what she punctures through is the prison of the Dark One.
like main co-researcher's name is I forget exactly, but something like Bitamon or Betamin, and there's a lot of debate basically in the fan community about who that might be, or if that person is anyone, or if he's just like some poor first year grad student.
This exploded in my face. I imagine an exchange went down something like turn or die, and he was the first one to get the choice, and he said hell no, and that was the end of him. And then it came to Lanfear, and it was turn or die, and she's like, well, I don't want to go his fate.
Did she go right away?
Yep.
I thought, I don't know.
I'm fairly certain that a lot of them took time to transition, but she was just caught in the backlash.
I know Ishmael was supposed to be one of the very first.
Yes. Well, because he immediately saw the futility in fighting the Dark One.
His dark philosopher's mind.
Yes, his dark philosopher's mind, which is also one of my favorite quotes from this beginning, where he talks to Rand and says, "This war has not lasted 10 years, but since the beginning of time. You and I have fought 1,000 battles with the turning of the wheel, 1,000 times 1,000, and we will fight until time dies and the shadow is triumphant." And this is Ishmael's... Thanks.
Seriously.
And I love this quote because it shows his philosophy right from the beginning, that every battle is a new battle, and the Dark One only has to win once.
And then that he's really sort of obsessed with the futility, or sort of kind of sunk into this dark circle of thoughts, I think, because he doesn't seem to be a crazy person. He doesn't seem to be evil, even, really. He just seems convinced that this is the only possible outcome.
Yeah, and in some ways he's given up, right? He believes everything is futile. There's nothing that we can do that's not that's going to advance the human race. We might as well give up, let ourselves go, and get this over with. He, in some ways, he's the ultimate suicidal character.
Yeah.
All he wants is to die.
Forever
and ever. And he can't do that without the Dark One destroying everything.
Right. And in this universe, you're reborn at some point.
Exactly.
Almost no matter what you do.
Yeah. It's even Balefire does not prevent you from being reborn.
I have a good quote that I wrote down that applies, that I can't remember if it's LTT in Rand's head or LTT at some other point speaking to Ishmael. LTT or Rand says, "You were always so full of thoughts, Elon. Your own logic destroyed you, didn't it?" And I just thought that applied really nicely.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
That's exactly the problem with him, with Ishmael. Elon, betrayer of hope, whatever you want to call him. In the prologue, they just call him betrayer of hope.
Yeah. Do they not even say Belzamon yet?
No, they don't. Well,
he's not Belzamon.
He's not Belzamon yet. He doesn't. I don't believe he takes on that name until the Trolloc Wars.
Yeah.
Because he's not trapped, right? This is the whole thing that a lot of people that I certainly missed on my first read through. This is after the backlash,
right?
And he's not trapped.
Oh yeah, I had never really thought about it until we talked about it during the last time we sat down together. He's not trapped. Not only is he not trapped, but there's some stuff later that shows maybe for as many as 40 years after the breaking, Ishmael is still around. It's one of those kind of faux history entries that's sort of throughout the book. Mm-hmm. And there's this guy called, presumably an Ogier, called Aaron, son of Milan, son of Senar, who documents sightings of Ishmael as late as 40 years after the breaking. And he also says that, not this particular person, but we know that Ishmael seems to be released every 1,000 years after that.
Right.
For the Trolloc Wars, the War of the 100 Years, and then the last battle. And each time he seems to be out for about 40 years.
Interesting. I didn't know the 40-year range.
Yeah, I never put that together either.
But it makes sense that like I know he came out every 1,000 years or so.
Yeah, it looks like it's about 1,000.
Yeah, and it definitely creates some of the major events in Randland that occur after the breaking.
It made me wonder how much of his later insanity has to do with like possibly actually being alive that long or being aware.
Oh, I think it has an awful lot to do with it. That and I think the true power has totally consumed him, because the true power is what they were looking for when they found the Dark One,
right?
Because the Dark One is the true power, and that's a key distinction to make in this series between the true power and the one power, because they do work a little bit differently, and he says that right in the beginning. When he says, as he heals Rand, he says, the Dark One's healing is not nearly as kind. It's a different kind of healing.
Yeah.
And it works differently, and it causes just incredible amounts of pain, whereas the one power doesn't. And it's sort of, and we hear about it with traveling. With the one power, you're sort of making the two places the same. With the female half, with the male half, you're sort of poking a hole. With the true power, you're ripping a hole in the universe. And then it sort of heals up behind you, kind of, eventually, maybe. It's pretty bad stuff, because you're channeling the force of the Dark One into the universe. So yeah, it's important difference as to which one's being used in the series.
I also had never seen this before. It came up in my reading that not just the saw that go across your eyes, but also the fire in place of eyes and mouth could some people think is also a symptom of using the true power.
Oh, absolutely.
Overusing.
I think the saw are the first symptom, and then that it basically, as the centuries wore on, they became more and more pronounced until the eyes and mouth just burned, right? They say over and over again, there's a cost. Oh man. Definitely. But they say there's a cost to using the one power, and a lot of the Forsaken aren't willing to pay that. It's addicting. It's incredibly addicting.
Or the true
power.
The
true power, yes. Oh gosh, it's so hard to keep those two straight.
I still mess it up.
I know. And what we see with Ishmael is that cost, because we see him as a relatively normal man in the prologue, and then when he comes back 3,000 years later.
Yeah, in the prologue, he seems sane, perfectly sane, really.
Totally sane. I mean, evil, but sane. Yeah. And that's where we see, he extended his hands and the light dimmed as if a shadow had been laid across the sun. That's him using that true power to heal.
Yeah. Also when he travels in the beginning, or when he travels to where Luz Theron is.
And I also wonder about that healing, because I do think, it may be something that only really happens in the eye of the world, but Moraine talks about once you've healed someone, that forms a link between you, and at this point, Ishmael heals LTT.
Oh man, it might be interesting to talk about that with Nynaeve later.
Oh, absolutely. And think of how many people she heals.
Yeah.
But there is that scene in the beginning when she comes right to their inn, and Moraine says, "You knew where she was because you healed her." Which one was it? Did you heal Perrin or did you heal Egwene? And she's like, "Oh, I healed Egwene with the breakback fever."
Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
I forgot all about that.
That's not really ever mentioned again, so that might be just something that was in the eye of the world and then sort of faded to the background. There are a few of those things.
Yeah, it's not really used as a plot device that I can think of. When we were talking about this a little last time, you were talking about where Ishmael heals LTT in this scene.
Yes.
And wondering if that's the beginning of the link.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. Is this healing is the beginning of the link between the two. It may also be one of the ways that he's able to find him.
Yeah.
If he can sense his soul, and certainly how he's able to come to him in his dreams in the rest of the book. Yeah,
he's one of the few talented male dreamwalkers ever, apparently.
Right, Ishmael is, absolutely. Yeah. And so that, combined with possibly a link from healing his soul, could explain partially how he's able to find him in his dreams. That's cool. I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I want to talk about this kind of stuff. So now we're about 2 pages in.
Lanfear and her assistant, who we're not sure exactly who that is, or if they appear in this later series. Drill this bore. Dio comes out and he's like, "World is mine now." And this crazy war breaks out. How many details do we know in there? The first few Aes Sedai to swear to the Dark One are Lanfear, Ishmael.
Yeah, there's a lot of details about exactly what happens, just in terms of the order, and some of that's reconstructed. I don't think we really need to go into too many details.
I don't know that we actually see any conversation.
No, that we definitely don't. But I do want to talk about sort of the timeline, because here he mentions 10 years, because he says,
10
talking
years
about the wars.
since...
you defeated me at the gates of Paradison, says Ishmael.
Right.
And then... Theron responds, 10 years, your foul master has racked this world. And so we get that 10 years figure, and that's certainly a period of time where the war has been going on, but the Dark One had broken out quite a bit before the war started.
Right. I'm not sure exactly how long, but I think it was actually a couple of years before battles started happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was a slow transition, right? So there was this disaster, but no one really realized anything bad was happening right away. But evil sort of crept into men's hearts. People started fighting more. They learned to use swords. They took this game that they called Swords, which was just like fighting with 2 sticks, and scoring points, more like fencing is today. And they turned it into a deadly game, and really that was Lewis Theron and Ishmael.
Oh.
Like he says, remember when we took that? And so, was it him or was it Bilal?
No. I want to say it was Ishmael, because Ishmael is always kind of thought of as LTT's equal,
right?
Essentially, in many ways, like academically and as far as raw talent and power in the power.
Yeah, they certainly seem like mirror images.
And I think we can also confirm that they get spat into the pattern at the same time every time. Oh, well, no.
Not necessarily.
For the battles, I guess.
There's certainly a dark champion and a light champion. We're not absolutely sure that they are.
They always show up at the same time.
They show up at the same time, or that they're Lewis Theron and and Elon. Right? It's possible that actually gets the crown is bestowed on different people in different turnings.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
I always thought of it as it's always Lewis Theron and Elon.
I think there's some mythology around the fact that there's a female dragon, and every other turning, it's a female dragon rather than a male dragon.
I like that.
Yeah. So
it would make more sense as far as like the themes of balance and mirror images of things,
right?
Yin and yang throughout the whole series.
Which, by the way, is a theory for the woman at the end.
I like that.
That's the female dragon.
I'm just kind of thinking as we're saying this that in this age, women are definitely the sort of powerful force on the planet. They kind of basically run the show.
Not in the Age of Legends.
No. I mean in Rand's
time, the Third Age.
Third Age. Sorry, there's a male dragon and like the female-run White Tower, for instance.
Right.
Many nations have female rulers.
So we're talking about this sort of slow return of evil to the world as the boar basically began to expand and get bigger and bigger, because it started out as just a tiny little hole. And as it grew, so too did the power of the Dark One, and his influence grew.
Gotcha.
And so at some point, there clearly became sides, a dark side and a light side.
Right. Especially as powerful people start to...
Sure, turn, swear fealty. But there was plenty of opportunity to be traitors, and, a lot of the Forsaken did some pretty awful things while they still pretended to be on the side of the good before turning to the side of evil. And so eventually war broke out. And frankly, the light side was not doing too hot. They're getting their asses
for the
kicked.
first quite a while, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And really, pretty much the whole time, light side was not doing so hot. They were pretty overwhelmed with the power of the dark one. And so what forms is this desperate plan, and there's two plans that form to either create the Chodenkal, which are these incredibly powerful Terangrial, Sangreal pairs,
right,
and use that to fight the Dark One. But there's some belief that they're so powerful they would destroy the world simply by using them. And then there is another plan, which is Lewis Theron's, which is to go to
the boar
itself in Shale Ghul and seal it up. And he wants women and men to work together to do so. And basically the women say, no, it's too dangerous. There's too much of a risk of tearing it all the way open and releasing the Dark One.
Right.
We're not going to do that. And so they opposed him. And what you're left with is Rand and his most faithful companion saying, fuck it, we're doing it live,
Yeah. Apparently 100 of them.
Right.
They're always called the 100 companions.
They are called the 100 companions, yeah. And I think that's actually supposed to be 100 companions. I don't think the number was different.
Well, sometimes in history, 100 years war is like 116 years or something.
Right, close enough. Whatever. Those 16 years, they were just, it's okay.
Round it.
Round down to the closest
100 sounds better.
Yeah. So they go up there and they catch all the 13 Forsaken, hanging out in the boar, in a big secret meeting. Now, there are way more than 13 Forsaken. These are just the 13 most powerful Forsaken.
Interesting. I never really thought of it. I mean, there certainly would have been tons of Dreadlords, and are there always 13? I guess throughout the series there are. But
I think there's almost never 13 throughout the series. We start killing them off pretty quick.
Oh, that's a good point too.
They talk about the most powerful Forsaken, and I think that there were more. These are just the 13 most powerful ones. And they seal them away. And in that process, they use the male half of the one power, Sadine. And they form a shield to seal the Dark One away. But to do so, they have to touch the Dark One. And he kicks back this just, stinky, foul odor. Ugh, he lets one rip, basically, right into the power. And it forms this oil slick on top. And all 100 companions, including Lewis Theron, who were there, were caught in an immediate kickback and immediately went insane.
Right. I feel like it's important to point out so that like all these men are making contact with the Dark One with Sidin, which is why throughout the Third Age, Sidin is tainted because it touches the Dark One, and Dark One, well, it's described as a counterstroke.
Sure. Yeah. He's not doing it, accidentally.
Gotcha.
No, he's putting a little bit of his foulness into it.
Yeah.
Because he's still trapped, right? He can't. The little boar, his power can get out, but the Dark One himself is still trapped. And so when they reach in to seal the boar, he actually does get touched with the power. And think about it. It's 100 people touching him at once. That's a lot of power.
Yeah.
Not linked though.
Right. You need a woman.
Yeah, men can't link together. So it was 100 individuals. I think of it as something like when the Asha'man formed the dome at Demise Wells. They link together all their power. And so I think it's something like that, where they're basically linking together the result rather than the power. But it's a bunch of different weaves woven together. I
was just thinking we also get to see at the very end of the series, Rand uses Sidin, and the True Power all at once. And I saw an explanation somewhere where essentially he's using the True Power as a shield so that only the True Power, he's using the True Power against the Dark One.
Absolutely.
As a shield.
Right.
While simultaneously creating this. And of course he's linked with powerful channelers and holding Kalimdor somewhere in there. I'd have to reread the scene again, but...
Well, and I think the key to that to understand is that even if the women went with him, he still would have failed, but then women and both Sidene and Sidar would have been tainted. Lewis Theron's plan would have failed no matter what he did. He could not have won.
We would just have been totally fucked if the women helped.
Right. So, you got to have some respect for the stubborn women not doing what they wanted them to do. He really messed up. That's, it's a foundation for the whole series.
Pretty much what saves Lewis Theron in the end is I've never thought of it that broadly before, but what saves him is that the women wouldn't help him 3,000 years ago.
Totally. Yeah, no, he needs to fail in order to succeed.
Partially,
yeah.
He needs to get like a C- on this job in order for everything to work out.
He needs to be a bit of a fuck up before he can. Yeah. Well, and what we're talking about, of course, is the taint, and how that affects his memory. Right. So we started this episode talking about the memory, and the way that memory carries forward is through the corruption, right? Rand himself talks about this in the last book, how there's no way he needed the memories of Lewis Theron to win.
Right.
But without the taint, he would have never had access to them.
He needed the taint to give him the memory of the failure so that he could see how to fix it.
Exactly.
So basically, RJ wrote all this before, or he at least must have written the ending before he even wrote the friggin' prologue.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure the last scene was probably the first thing he wrote. Or, I'm sure he revised it a few times.
Yeah.
But I'm almost sure that he knew how it was going to end right in the beginning. He didn't know how he was going to get there, but he knew that last scene. So, all of a sudden, you have 100 channelers who are mad, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of other channelers who are going to go mad.
Yeah.
And one thing that was always interesting to me is this destruction that creates the Dragon Mount has to be one of the first events of the breaking.
Yeah, presumably. We don't know the exact timeline between the last, or maybe I shouldn't say last act of the 100 Companions, but the last sane act of the 100 Companions, and Lewis Theron arriving at home. This is presumably his home, this palace. I don't know.
Right. It's his home, his family, and his servants, and his.
Yeah. But I assume they go insane immediately.
I also assume that, yeah.
So Lewis Theron travels home. We don't know what happens, but he murders his entire family.
My assumption is that this all takes place later on in the same day. After the sealing.
I'm nodding.
Yeah. Because, yeah, I think he goes insane. He travels home. He destroys his family. Ishmael's broken out. Ishmael doesn't seem to realize that the Dark One has been sealed away, that the Forsaken have been sealed away. He's not bemoaning that. He's not saying,
So he may just be chasing Lewis Theron at this point.
That's what I think, is that he actually chased him.
That makes sense. It doesn't mention it. I never really thought about it, but that must be.
Or, Lewis Theron disappears and he follows him.
Yeah.
But he doesn't even know he's insane at this point. And since that happened immediately,
right.
It really has to be one of the first events following the breaking, possibly, or the sealing, possibly even the same day. He does say, already your companions are tearing the world apart.
He does say that.
So here's the thing. Remember your futile attack on the Great Lord of the Dark. Remember his counterstroke. Remember, even now the 100 companions are tearing the world apart, and every day 100 more join them.
It's a short period of time.
It's a very short period of time. It may be a couple days, but I don't think much more than that.
The black-clad man's eyes widened, started to the body of the golden-haired woman, then back to Lewis Theron. Shaitan, take you. Does this taint already have you so far in its grip? So he's surprised.
He's very surprised.
Ishmael's surprised that he's that insane already. But I would assume if you're that close to the Dark One and he's trying to do something terrible to you, it wouldn't take time.
No, and I imagine Rand was, he must have been the first maybe to touch. Certainly he was leading.
I would assume so.
Yeah. And one thing to know is that he is sane when he dies. But he is basically shown this image of his wife and his children and his family, and everything around him is dead. And not only dead and destroyed, because he could seek revenge if someone had killed his family, but he did it himself.
Right.
And so the pain and the anguish, he wanted it to end. He wanted it to stop. And so he draws on the true source, and he draws way more than anyone can hold, because he's already the most powerful channeler, and he draws way more than he can hold, and basically pulls this bar of pure energy down into himself.
I was wondering if he's wearing this ring of Tamerlane. Some people think it's a item of power. It's not just it's not just like a symbol of authority or anything. It might be a Angreal of some kind.
That would make sense, an Angreal or a Sangreal even, because...
Just to explain the crazy level of destruction.
Well, it's hard to really know if it's just him really, really overdrawing his own power.
Yeah, we don't know what that would look like, really.
Right. But it would make sense if he had just gone to battle that he would have any Angreal or Sangreal on him that he may possess.
Yeah.
He would be...
And we see later that many Angreal are just worn like Cadsuane's hair pieces.
Sure. Yeah. the net.
Yeah.
Right. And Lewis there, and Rand does say, as Lewis Theron, he wore one of the first. The nets.
Oh. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, after he gets his memory back later on, he says to Cadsuane, he's like, "Do you think I wouldn't recognize it? I wore one of the first." Like, I had one. I invented them, right? Like, he totally remembers making them and wearing them. So
cool.
Yeah, there's definitely that like little comment there. So the fact that he would be wearing a ring of the Tamerlane, and that would be an item of power. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I hadn't thought about that before.
Yeah, with the context and stuff, it almost definitely is.
Sure, that's really cool. No, and then I love the description here of the destruction of the earth,
oh yeah.
Stone turned to vapor at its touch. The earth thrashed and quivered like a living thing in agony. Only a heartbeat did the shining bar exist, connecting the ground and the sky. But even after it vanished, the earth yet heaved like a sea in the storm. And just this incredible strike of power that bores deep into the earth and wounds it, and it heaves, and the imagery is wonderful. Yeah. But what we notice then is, of course, the Dragon Mount and the creation of Tar-Valon.
Right. The island.
The island, yeah. That straight river gets moved and forms around an island, and that is the island of Tar-Valon, where the seat and the heart of Aes Sedai power, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Also, it's a vagina and a penis.
That's probably true also.
I mean, has anyone else looked at the map of Tar-Valon?
Yin and Yang.
Not. Have you not looked at the map of Tar-Valon?
I mean, I've looked at it, but I'm going to look at it again.
Yeah,
right now.
yeah. Hold on. Yeah, you need to bring up the map of Tar-Valon and look at it as a vagina.
I mean, I can see it in my head. It's definitely, oh, Jesus, yeah. It's
And if you look at the northernmost tip, there's a little, like, roundish... Uh-huh.
Yeah, it definitely looks like a crude drawing of a vagina.
That's not accidental. It's not.
No, I mean, it's too convenient for it to be. I just never even thought about it. I was just like, it's a one narrow island in the middle of a river. Or never looked at it closely enough to really do much thinking about it.
Well, this story, of course, concentrates on the difference between males and females. And right here in the beginning, we have...
a mountain and an island and a river.
Mountain and an island and a river. You have that contrast, and the island and the river that looks like a vagina.
It's a fucking volcano,
right?
Spewing things,
spurting out lava from the tip. Yeah, it's.
Is it
not subtle?
It's an active volcano through the whole series, right? Or it smokes sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. It's not dormant totally.
We begin the series with our hero committing suicide.
Welcome. Goodbye. And in some ways, we're not really sure Louis Theron is our hero. And just in terms of, for most of the series, you don't know.
We don't actually know that yet.
Yeah. And you sort of think of him as the evil voice in Rand's head, you know?
Yeah.
But that's just the insanity talking.
Yeah. There are no beginnings or endings.
There are none. But we should end this podcast.
I was thinking about that recently because my local bar, this place, The Hideaway, that's right next to Jam Cafe. So that's like 4 blocks from where I live. So I end up in there quite a bit. I think they have like Whiskey Wednesday or something, and they sell just the local whiskeys. So I guess like Oregon, Washington whiskeys are all discounted. I forget exactly how much. So I went through trying them all because Bullet isn't one of those discounted whiskeys. So it's like, well, let me get the $4 whiskey, not the $7, you know? And they were all crap, basically. Long story short. I thought the Burnside bourbon was the best out of all of them, but not as good as Bullet. And this is better than Bullet.
Yeah. I mean, it has to do with how they make it, right? Because they make it off the pot still. And then they dilute that down with just raw vodka.
I feel like you can taste that rubbing alcohol taste in most of them.
Have you ever seen single origin whiskey?
Yeah, I've seen it. I know I've had some, like, what do they call it, single barrel.
Yeah. Do you know what that means?
It means it's not blended.
Yeah.
So each barrel is unique, basically.
Right. But they still dilute it.
Dilute it? With the garbage alcohol?
Uh-huh.
Bummer.
A single origin, you just got one still, which means you get better sort of unique flavor. When they blend it, it all sort of evens out into sort of a boring... That's how you get like Bullet, right? You blend whiskey together until it tastes like Bullet.
So it's the same whiskey every time.
Exactly.
Basically.
But it's still diluted. Versus a single origin, you're going to have... I don't know why I say single origin. It's because Jessica, the coffee, is single origin.
Oh.
So single... What is it? What is it on the barrels? Because there's blended, and then what's the opposite of blended on the whiskey?
They call them single barrel.
Single
usually.
barrel, okay.
Or single malt.
Single malt, that's what it's called. Single malt versus blended.
Single malt.
Yeah. So are we done with the whiskey?
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah. Take one more.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Let's do one more and then start talking about the book.
Okay.